and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to begin a three-part series, really three episodes, about parenting in junior tennis, and really trying to get into how we can educate and support parents better in that process. We're going to use an article from 2018 called Educating and Supporting Tennis Parents, a Grounded Theory of Parents' Needs During Childhood. The authors are Sam Thrower, Chris Harwood, and Chris Spray. So that's going to be a good bit of background for us. But Josh and I are also going to add some of our own experience in this area of working in junior tennis and with parents and trying to help them do their job as well as they can. So today is going to be part one, and we're going to go through really the difficulties of tennis parenting and some of the stressors that parents face, some of the maybe behaviors that are more positive, some behaviors that are a little bit less positive, and then also talk about what players actually prefer to get from their parents. Part two is going to be about the learning environment for parents. So how do we really support parents to learn as much as they can, and what are the things that they need to learn? And then lastly, we're going to talk about competition needs. What should parents keep in mind to best support their players in the competition arena, but also just around competition in general. So today, again, we're going to talk about what are some of the stressors, the difficulties with parenting in junior tennis. Again, positive behaviors, negative behaviors, player preferences. The paper that we're basing some of this on was written in the UK. So much of it is about really work done in Britain. So, there might be some cultural differences between the Lawn Tennis Association, the LTA, and where we are in the United States. Certainly differences to other countries based on where everybody else lives. So I think we'll relate some of that. I don't know that it's that different. There are some differences maybe in the developmental system, but a lot of things are similar. So Josh, let's just maybe have a little bit of an opening here about tennis parents. Maybe some of your experience with them, because I think it's very easy. Sometimes you'll hear coaches do this to kind of vilify or demonize some of these parents based on maybe outliers. But I think in general, most parents come into this situation really wanting to do the best they can for their child. They have the right intentions, but this is a very complicated topic, tennis, and a very complicated system. So I'd love to hear, just some of your initial thoughts on what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that, parents go in by and large with the best intentions, right? They want they want their kid to find a sport that they enjoy. They maybe had experience playing tennis themselves, or maybe not, maybe enjoyed watching the sport. And I think that, yeah, parents tend to go in with good intentions. They want their kid to get exercise, to socialize, to learn to compete, to be able to benefit from a lot of the main, potential benefits of the sport. And there's, a lot of great things about the sport of tennis, obviously. But I think there's also a lot of challenges. And as you said, there's definitely outliers. There's definitely examples of parents at every level, at the junior level. You also see this at the pro level with parent player relations, where you see horror stories as well. Obviously these are not the norm, but they do happen, and they do tend to cast certain parents in a bad light. So yeah, I think this is definitely an important topic, and a topic that we've touched on in the past, but haven't focused on up to this point as much. So I think, focusing on it for these three episodes will definitely be an interesting way to to sort of unpack some of these different pieces of it, right? Some of the challenges some of the challenges, some of the our specific suggestions, and talk about some of the research as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's really relevant. I'm sure many of our listeners are parents. Some of those parents may play themselves, some may not, some may have experience from the past or follow the sport. Um, but yeah, I think, we talk a lot about the challenges of tennis players and what they go through. So, being able to add in that added element of, what the parent goes through and what the parent can maybe do differently, I think will be important. And it's interesting because, if somebody wants to drive a car, they have to, get a license, right? They have to do, certain training and take a test and get a license. If you want to, if you want to do other things, you need to, get some sort of certification or license for that. But, when it comes to parenting, and yes, there are maybe sport parenting courses out there and books and education, and it's out there, but generally there's no guidebook. And as you said, people are trying to do their best, but being able to provide some additional guidance or some specific suggestions, I think can definitely be helpful.
For sure. And I think we both know that what we're trying to do is help match actions to intentions. We have good intentions. Can we start to add the right behaviors and actions so that we're fully supporting young players through their development? And it starts early. It could start as early as, say, in red ball, 5, 6, 7 years old, and goes through the different colors of the balls, which that in itself is a complication. Some parents are like, what's up with these balls? What's up with the colors? What do they mean? And so forth, right? So there's a lot of things that need to be sort of learned and brought more to the surface for parents. And we want to recognize that, especially from ages 6 to 13, parents are really the most influential kind of source of behavior and values and virtues. After that, it's a lot more around their peers and maybe coaches and others. But in this, really early age, and which I think is where we would want to concentrate education at the beginning, right, to help parents start off correctly. It's hard to take just like it would be hard. It's harder to train maybe a 17-year-old Josh on mental skills sometimes than somebody who is 12 or 13 and very, very open-minded and doesn't have any well-formed opinions about that. And so I think that's why this is a key thing, because they are a very influential part of their children's lives, from 6 to 13. So before we get into the first section where we're going to talk about some of the stressors of being a tennis parent, let's talk a little bit about our new sponsor, Go Sport. And I know you had something that you wanted to go through today. We've had a discussion with Chris, the owner of Go Sport, and again, great match for us as a podcast. But yeah, why don't you take a crack at what you have?
Yeah. And we're really excited to be partnering with Go Sport. We've talked about in past episodes that packing your bag well can lead to greater feelings of confidence and readiness when you step onto the court. And Go Sport tennis and sport bags help tennis players and other athletes enter the court feeling this way. Their bags emphasize innovation, subtle design, and durability. And you can use the code TennisIQ10 for 10% off your order at gosport.com. That's GEAU sport.com. And yeah, we're really excited to be partnering with them. We think, it's definitely a great fit. And I think we have a lot in common with them, and we hope that you'll check out Go Sport and check out their bags.
Yeah, for sure. Visit gosport.com today and see what they have to offer. It's some really great stuff. All right, Josh. So let's start talking with about maybe some of the stressors that parents face. There are a lot that we can go over, and we can get a little bit more into these. But as I look at, we've created a list here of some of the things. I think one of the maybe the first stressors is really the fact that the parent, especially at a younger age, you're almost like the agent, the manager of the player. So you gotta gotta organize everything. You gotta figure out the tournament schedule. You might have to deal with physical therapy people. You also have to go watch matches, and that can be difficult in itself. We can get a little bit more into that. You have to understand just sort of the developmental concerns of a sport like tennis, the nature of the sport. So when you think of some of the stressors, what do you think are some of the big ones that parents should be aware of, and maybe get some more education on?
I think there's a lot. I mean, I think that yeah, and that parents need to understand the whole ecosystem, right? And maybe that parent was a former player themselves, and and is more more knowledgeable about how different level tournaments work, how rankings work, how different clubs operate, how often players should be playing and training at different ages, right? A 5-year-old and a 15-year-old, for each of them, it's going to look a little bit different in terms of how often and how intensely they ought to be training. So I think, understanding all of these different pieces, right? I mean, we talked about in a recent episode about UTR and the impact of focusing on UTR among players. And, I think parents often have a lot to do with that as well, right? Parents and coaches, I think, can be part of that in terms of really emphasizing UTR, bringing it up, making comparisons, saying, you should beat somebody, you're supposed to beat them, things like that. So I think one of the first challenges is just really understanding the competitive tennis ecosystem in terms of tournaments and training, and you know helping them understand what it takes for their kid to become a competitive player.
Yeah, and I think also understanding that system is a little bit contradictory, because if you're working with a good coach, what your good coach will tell you is that this is a long-term development sport, that we want to emphasize learning and improvement first. And your child is not going to become world champion by 12. It's going to take a long time. Yet the system kind of works against that. The system is set up, especially once you get into 12 and unders, and most of what we'll talk about here is probably more US centric. It may be different in other countries, but in the US, the 12, there are certainly tournaments for 10 and under, and they're competitive, and there are results, but there are no rankings. But once you're in the 12 and under and you're using yellow ball, there are rankings, there are different levels, there are national events. Of course, like you said, we had a recent episode about UTR, so those results are going into that. And as a parent, you can feel this real pressure to want to enter your son or daughter into a lot of these tournaments, and you can get caught up in the rankings and the ratings. Looking at how it works again here in the US, there are different levels. So like a level 1 is like a top national. Level 2 is just right below that. Level 3s tend to be more regional, but every region will have like a big, 1 or 2 big sectional championships, which are level 3s. Level 4s are really important tournaments as well. You have to qualify with a ranking for that. And then you have, 5s, 6s, and 7s, and they're good quality tournaments, but the qualifications for those are not always as strict. And so it's very easy to say, oh, there's a level 4 or level 3 this month. Well, we got to play it. Thing is, there's like one every month. And you can get very caught up in playing these events. I'm working with one young player, and he's very good. And playing some of these tournaments is important to him. But over the last few months, playing these tournaments actually became more important to his dad than it was to him. And I mentioned that to his dad. Now his dad didn't take that very well, to be honest. He took it, Josh, that I was saying that it wasn't important to his son. I was like, no, it is important to him. But for some reason, it's more important to you. Why is that? Why are you pushing him to go play a tournament when he's hurt so he can get points to qualify for this other tournament? He's young. This doesn't make any sense to me. There will be more, sectional championships in the future. It doesn't make sense to jeopardize the player's health for this one tournament. So it's an example of not completely his fault. The system is telling you play, 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 play week after week. It's always a tournament. And yet then you have coaches saying, no, it's about long-term development. Don't worry about winning when you're in the 12s or the 14s or even the 16s or ever, really. And so I think that is a real stressor. Is like, how do you balance that? Especially when most of the people around you have bought into that competition system as being like the right way, or they have just accepted it and they're not able to break out of it. So I think that, to me, I don't know if you see that a lot, Josh, but I think that that's a big stressor, is like, how do I really balance competition and learning and development and do it in such a way that it helps my child?
I think it's a lot about sort of like keeping up with the Joneses, I guess we could say, where it's, you see other players at the tennis club and they're playing all these big tournaments, they're improving their UTR, they're playing with these certain coaches or certain higher level clinics, and parents see that and they say, okay, well, I want that for my kid, right? And and I get that. I think that there's nothing inherently wrong with with that, because I think, again, parents want the best for their kids, but I think that that ends up leading to this over emphasization of just results, of results and playing these tournaments. You mentioned the different levels of tournaments. If especially at the higher level, if somebody wants to be playing these higher level tournaments, these don't all take place in your home city, right? This requires travel. This requires flights, oftentimes hotels, right? It's a big commitment, right? It's a big commitment. There's a lot of there can be a lot of cost involved, and I think sometimes when the parent feels like they're making that commitment, and they're paying for lessons, they're paying for travel, they're spending their weekends or even weekdays at times um, doing this, then that leads to more and more pressure. It's sometimes there's this feeling that, okay, we're putting in all this, all these resources and money and time and energy into this, so there has to be some sort of ROI, right? That there needs to be some sort of ROI, or there needs to, we need to see results. And and everybody's on their own sort of journey or pathway with that. For some people, they start, really taking the sport. Some kids really start taking the sport seriously, and they see those results quickly. They start winning matches, tournaments. They have, the kids get excited about the trophies. They have more of a smooth journey at that point. For other kids, it just takes longer, and there can be a number of different reasons for that. But I think from a parent perspective, yeah, I think there are a lot of challenges, and I think that you know, the parent, and we've talked in the past about trying to have it be more of an athlete centered model, where the athlete really is at the center of their development and starting to make more and more decisions. And obviously a 8-year-old is not going to be designing their entire tournament calendar for a year. But starting to get them more and more involved in the decision making process as they get older, as they mature, I think makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think when we could talk about some of these different stressors of competitive tennis and training and development. But I think, yeah, I think there's a number of them.
I think one last one I'd like to talk about is just the stress of watching matches. And it could get very emotional if you're getting caught up in that. You're going to see bad line calls. You're going to see bad behavior. You're probably going to see effort and attitude issues, and it may even be from your kid doing some of these things. And learning to handle yourself as if you are a performer as well can be very stressful. And I think this might lead us a little bit, Josh, into some of the negative behaviors we see when parents are not as well educated on what their role is, at a tournament. So watching matches. So, in terms of like getting involved when there's a line call issue and a parent is on the sideline, very often they'll say something to the opposing player about what they're doing. And that's obviously not appropriate, but the lack of education on this topic leads parents to often think more about the winning of the match and the fairness of it. And we both know life is not fair. There's actually an opportunity to teach a lesson here, but they're not doing that, right? So these are just some of the things that we see, and I am part of a sportsmanship committee here in USTA New England. So I see reports of these types of things, maybe more often than your average person might see that. And of course we hear it probably from the parents that we work with, Josh, or even the kids that we work with, that, hey, somebody, this parent said something to me. And it just sort of makes me shake my head and like, I'm sorry, that absolutely should not happen. When parents get more involved in matches, maybe they themselves lose emotional control. They have a hard time controlling their own behavior. Maybe they're embarrassing not only themselves but their kids. I've seen that in person as well, and it's very interesting to almost see like a 10-year-old be the more mature one in the environment than the parent. But there's something going on with the sport that is driving people to behave this way. Maybe just your comments on that, and maybe some other negative behaviors that we could comment on.
It reminds me a little bit of, and I'm not sure if you ever watched South Park, the show where the kids would, I think it was baseball, the kids from the show would be playing in their, little league baseball games, and the parents would be having their own competition in the stands. The parents would end up fighting and would be essentially having, wrestling matches in the stands, and that would sort of be their, their entertainment for the day. And obviously that's a comically extreme example, but I think that, yeah, you definitely see at matches, you see parents getting involved, you see parents directly talking to other players or talking to tournament directors about the other players. I think, even less extreme, but still impactful. A kid will, miss a shot or not be playing their best, and they'll look from the court to their parents, and they'll see their parents, negative reactions or frustration or negative body language or things like that. And again, you see this all the way up to the pro tour, right? You see this happening where, parents or coaches in the boxes are, reacting in certain ways, and players are looking up at those parents. So I think we see this at different levels of the sport, even with, things like high school tennis, where there's, coaches have to make decisions in terms of cuts and in terms of lineups and in terms of playing time and things like that, that parents will often, get involved as well. And again, I get it. I think parents want the best for their kids, and parents can be protective of their kids. And when their kid is in a situation where it feels like they're not being treated fairly or taken advantage of or being disrespected, it it's tough. It's tough to see, and you as a parent, you want to do something. You don't want to just sit back and just kind of let it happen. You want to do something, but I think that there are a lot of life lessons that can be taught by allowing the kid. And again, it obviously depends on age and level and maturity and different factors. But I think that there's a lot to be gained by letting the kid, you know, learn from the situation themselves. And that might mean fending for themselves. That might mean maybe not handling the situation in the best way the first time, but being able to learn from it, being able, that leading to a conversation or multiple conversations where that can really serve as a learning experience, right? I mean, maybe it's cheating that the player has to deal with from their opponent. Maybe it's a high school experience where players not getting starting time and the coach won't give them an answer why. Well, maybe this is uh, a great opportunity for that 14-year-old freshman to be able to practice being assertive, having a tough conversation with a coach, and and talking to that coach about it, asking them about it, not attacking them about it, but being able to ask them, understand why that decision was made, understand if there's things that they need to work on with their game, understand if they'll have, opportunities to challenge for that spot in the future. So I think, as rather than the urge being always to get more and more involved and to maybe do more and more for the kid, yeah, to let the kid make certain decisions, learn from their own mistakes rather than maybe protecting them, from those mistakes in the first place. And then again, having different conversations and, making these learning experiences whenever possible.
So before we get into the positive behaviors, because I think you're touching on how we can transition, Josh, into that, let me just list off some of the other negative behaviors that were in the paper that I think make a lot of sense, right? So the idea of placing excessive pressure on players does not help. We already mentioned excessive involvement, poor emotional control, embarrassing behavior, too much tennis talk. So maybe you're getting too serious about it. Maybe restricting your child's social life so that they can do more training or getting ready for tournaments. And then you mentioned a really good one here about the emotional reactions during points. Really, parental approval is or there's not, it's conditional approval based on how players are performing. So their approval is really tied to sort of the life experience of the player. So on the positive side, though, and again, the negative stuff is more outliers, and if anything, for most parents, it's really a result of not being educated well enough about how this all works and what their role is, and they're all just sort of coming in at it as rookies and just really trying to do the best they can to figure the whole thing out, and it's not easy. So when I look at the behaviors that are really positive and that help players, that where we're being supportive, we're communicating in positive ways, we're keeping players motivated to train their best, to compete at their best. We're helping them develop their talent. Realizing, I think what you're saying, Josh, that tennis can really be used to develop psychological, social, life skills, as well as getting you in good shape. It's an active sport. Parents can be very positive with their players when they're having more shared decision making, working on that together. Unfortunately, as players get better, these positive behaviors tend to decrease. So that's something for people to keep in mind is let's not stop doing what is working. And just because your player is getting better, let's not start dipping into some of the negative behaviors. What are some positive behaviors that you've seen as a sports psychology consultant?
I think there's a lot of different ones. I think that um, you know, broadly being supportive of that athlete, right? Being supportive of their journey and of sort of helping them put together, sort of connect the different dots, right? Whether that means, what that player needs to do um, physically to get better, right? Whether that means their training, whether that means their, strength and conditioning, what that player needs to do mentally, helping that, that parent helping the kids understand how tournaments work, right? Understanding the different levels, understanding the different age groups, understanding when to maybe play up at a older age group. So I think when the parents are there to really support the kid, it, sort of taking center stage and making it their journey and making their own decisions, as we talked about a little bit earlier. I think that would be sort of a starting point in terms of one of those positive behaviors.
Yeah. I think the one that I like to see the most is how parents can positively communicate with their player, and making it more about helping them through these difficult situations as opposed to maybe getting self righteous about, yes, you got cheated or that's not fair, etc. It's like, all right, that happened. How'd you handle it? Let's talk about how maybe we do it a little bit better next time. This is the nature of the sport. Yeah, you're going to get bad line calls, or you're going to face people who have a win at all costs mentality. How do we want to handle that such that we can remain, good people going forward? And so, I even have in mind some of the parents that I've worked with in the past who are really good at that kind of thing, being very level headed, understanding that it was not their role to solve problems out on the court, but it was to show really unconditional love when their players come off the court, always proud of them, especially if they've competed with great attitude and great effort. Um, and one thing that's not here in terms of a positive behavior, Josh, but I think is, again, I'll relate it to some of these parents, is bringing empathy to this process, because tennis is very hard. It is often called one of the loneliest sports that one can play. The kid is 100% responsible, really, for what is going on his or her side of the court. There's no one else to say that person let us down today. So, a lot of parents that come to this sport have not played it.
Mm-hmm.
They often don't understand that. And that was one suggestion in the article that I completely agree with, is if you're going to get your child into tennis, you should give it a go. Get out there. See what it's like. Because if we are, say, watching every little thing our child does and sort of criticizing it, pretend that you had somebody over your shoulder all day long looking at everything you did and making a comment about it. That's what it feels like if we're not bringing a perspective of empathy. Being human is hard. Being a tennis player is hard. These are difficult situations. The more as parents that we can understand and then bring some compassion, yet encouragement to be better, I think that's a positive behavior to me, is because we're always looking to just be better and better and better. We're not just looking backwards and saying, why'd you do that? We needed to win this match. Now we don't have any points, or whatever. That conversation could descend in many different ways. So to me, that's like one of my favorite aspects of it is bringing empathy along with really effective communication that's always looking forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we talk about tennis being hard, and it certainly is, but it can look really easy from an outsider's perspective. When you're watching from the stands, when you're watching on TV, it's easy to say, well, why didn't they? I think of the situation where Let's say somebody has sort of a short ball, like an easy, what looks like an easy put away shot. Let's say halfway between the service line and the net, right? Sort of like a sitter ball, and the other player is just kind of at the baseline, maybe sort of like picking a side that they're going to try to defend on, and the player who has the sitter ball hits it to the wrong side, right? And it's like, well, why didn't you go to the other side? Well, it's like, well, I didn't know in the moment that the other player was gonna, guess that particular side. And when we're watching on TV, when you're watching from the stands, the game looks easy. It's like, okay, well, why can't you just get your serve in? Right? Well, why are you making so many errors? Well, why did you double fault there? Why did you lose that match to that player? Why aren't you able to handle your emotions out there? And in the moment, it's hard. It's really hard. The physical side of the game is really challenging. The mental side of the game is really challenging. And yeah, especially when parents haven't been through it themselves, it's easy to feel like, okay, this my kid is training so much, is taking the sport really seriously. They should be playing at a higher level. They should be able to win that match. They should be more consistent or whatever it may be. Um, but it's yeah, I think and I hear it from a lot of parents that they do get how hard it is. Maybe they've been through it or maybe they don't. Maybe they've just been to enough tournaments and understand more about the sport that they get that it's tough. They get that it's a lot of pressure being in a match, right? Just playing the sport itself is full of pressure, right? The way the scoring system works, break points, game points, deuce points, tiebreakers, thirds, the deciding sets, all of that. It's a lot of pressure, but they also understand the other pressures around a player, right? Whether it's from coaches or from peers, right? I would say certain positive behaviors that I see are behaviors where parents are able to help their kid take some pressure off of themselves, right? Where instead of maybe adding pressure, which I think certain parents do inadvertently, accidentally, finding ways to help them take pressure off of themselves and focus on their process and focus on, that excellence and mastery piece. Focus on working towards being the best version of themselves and that being the end goal rather than it being all about results and outcomes and winning right now. Um, and the goal is not to be the best 10-year-old or the best 12-year-old, right? In your town or in the country or in the world, right? It's great if somebody is, or okay, if there's the best 12-year-old in the world, yes, they probably have a higher likelihood of being a top pro player than somebody who's maybe not at that level. But there's also a lot of kids who get to a really high level as a junior and burn out and stop playing the sport, end up really hating the sport, right? And I think it often has to do with that added pressure. It often has to do with them feeling like maybe they're supposed to be better than they are, or they can't lose, or they don't want to let down their parents. So I think the more that it can be about simply trying to do the best that you can, and I think that can sound vague, like, oh, just go out there and do your best, but really trying to strive for excellence and mastery rather than it being all about results right now. Then I think we can get to that point of really looking forward to playing this sport, really working towards something and ultimately enjoying it, which is for most people a reason why they start playing the sport. It's fun, they enjoy it, but I think for a lot of people that love, that passion really starts to go away as it becomes more and more about competing and winning.
Which would be the reason they leave the sport,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Exactly.
it's a key component is that enjoyment factor. Um, and since we want to make sure that players are enjoying themselves, let's talk about what players actually want from their parents. And I'll read through some of these um, comments really from the paper about what players want. But I will say that it made me also think about the work of Amanda Visek in fun integration theory and how. And I know you've done some research, Josh, on some on fun in tennis or fun in sports as well. So love to get your perspective on that, because we do want to keep it fun, and players do have preferences for how they would like their parents to behave. So I'll just read off some of these and we can comment on them. So no coaching during matches. That's a good one. Often we'll see that on the sidelines as somebody coaching or making comments. Um,
Which may also be against the rules, by the way, and that also sends a certain message to their kids about, that they don't necessarily need to follow the rules, or that, oh, if it's, it's a little bit of cheating, but that's okay. So I think that also sends a certain signal or a certain lesson to their kids as well.
yeah, can. I actually worked with one player who was telling her parents, stop it.
Hmm.
You can't do that. And again, it's putting the child in the play of in the role of being the mature one in the relationship. Um, Players prefer that the parent comments be focused more on effort and attitude, not on level and winning. That they respect the etiquette of tournament play, not get involved in matches. That their nonverbal behavior, so facial expressions, body language, match their supportiveness that they have talked about, that they are supporting their player. When providing feedback, that it's realistic, it's positive about their performance. I think in general, wasn't part of this, but it's always a good idea to have your player speak first. Well, what has happened, when that's the time. And they prefer behaviors that demonstrate support and belief in their children without the pressure to win. And I think if these things can be adhered to, and I think it makes a lot of sense for us to listen to what players want, because in many ways, Josh, I think of them as the CEO, even if they are like 10 years old. They're the CEO of the performance team. We are there to support the player. We may have to do a lot of work in early ages to do that, but ultimately, what they need from us is an important conversation, and we should really respect that. Other thoughts on what players prefer from their parents?
I think that I think it's a good question. I think that I think that the talking first piece is really key. I think a lot of players talk about that car ride home from a tournament, right? They just lost a match. They get their bag, they go to the car, and the first thing that they hear is from their parents. Oh, why did you do this? You should have done this. How did you double fault in that big moment? You should have won that match. Before they get the chance to process it, which can take some time, before they get the chance to reflect on it themselves, before they get the chance to talk it through, they're hearing from their parent about all the things that they did wrong or all the things they should have done differently. And as we talked about, it's so much easier from an outsider's perspective to sometimes see these things, or it can seem really obvious. So I think that's the first one, that the parent, or sorry, that the kid is able to sort of speak first, sort of lead that discussion. Um, I think in terms of other things that kids want from their parents, they want, they want the opportunity to play the sport, to train, to go to tournaments. But I don't think that they want to feel that tennis is everything. That all their parents talk about is tennis. That they don't have opportunities to maybe play other sports or maybe do other things or other sorts of, you know, um, social engagements, right? I could think of an example of the player that I work with who decided not to play a tournament around a big holiday. I think it was Halloween, and there was a opportunity to go to a big event or a big party with a lot of their friends, and they really wanted to go to this, and they'd been to a lot of other big events, recently, and they had a lot of other big tournaments coming up, and their parent agreed. and they were able to go to that event and had a great time. And that didn't them not playing that one tournament did not derail their tennis career. In fact, it maybe prolonged it. Maybe it really helped it. So I think that there's a lot that kids want from their parents, or expect or hope from their parents. But I think that yeah, one of those big ones is just that ability to be supported in their tennis journey, but also sort of finding balance where tennis fits into the rest of their life. That everything is not about tennis.
Right, because they're a whole person, not just a tennis player. I wanted to just bring up a couple of things from fun integration theory. Amanda Visick is generally the primary researcher on that with respect to parents. So kids really prefer when their parents show good sportsmanship. Kids like it when parents are friendly with other parents and that they get complimented by other parents, so that there's a community there. And I think in different parts of the world, different parts at least the United States, where the tennis community is small and maybe gets smaller and smaller as the kids get older, we do see a little bit of this where the parents are much better with each other than maybe they would be at the beginning. They certainly like when their parents watch, but of course it has to go along with supportive behavior, and they like to be congratulated for doing a good job out there. So some of those there's some crossover with that, but again, I think it's extremely important that we listen to what those kids want, because they're the ones out there doing the work. They're the quote unquote man in the arena, person in the arena, and we're there to support them, and we have to remember that. So I think in terms of like what we've covered today, Josh, the difficulties of tennis parenting, really recognizing that this is hard. And as we get into the future episodes on this, next time we'll talk about the learning environment, how we can support parents educationally, and then lastly we'll get into the competition needs. You spoke a little bit about the post match. We'll cover more on that in our third episode. And so today we've covered different stressors. We've covered some of the maybe unfortunate negative behaviors that can happen, what the positive behaviors are, and what players really want from their parents. Before we wrap it up, Josh, do you have any final thoughts?
I guess just one last thing, and I think this relates to some other things we've talked about, is I think kids don't ever want to feel overshadowed by their parent, right? They never want to feel like, maybe the parent embarrassed them, or the parent, was the actions of the parent were, somehow, yes, it's somehow overshadowed or somehow ended up becoming more important than them, right? I think that can certainly lead to kids not wanting to play the sport, not wanting to compete when they know that their parent is going to be, whether it's causing a scene or whether it's just, them, a sort of their body language or that look on their face when things aren't going well. So I think, yeah, making sure that parents aren't, embarrassing their kids or sort of overshadowing their own performance. And yeah, I think just, reminding parents that it is a performance in itself, right? Just like the kid is having to handle pressure, just like the kid is having to handle their emotions with the ups and downs of the sport. It's the same thing when you're watching, right? It really is the same thing, that you have to be able to handle that higher pressure moment. You have to be able to handle the ups and downs. You have to be able to handle things not going your way, or things out of your control. And it's part of it. And, again, it's parents don't generally get that training. So they're just trying to do their best. They're just trying to figure it out. But I think, yeah, we want to, focus on this topic, for these episodes, because it's, to give some additional perspective, but also some suggestions, so that when you're in a tough situation as a parent, that you have, that you have tools that you can rely on, that you have ways of thinking, that you have sort of a game plan so that you can, so that you can continue to support your kid in the best possible way.
I think that is a good reminder, Josh, right? We are all performers in this environment, and life is performance. So I think the more we take that seriously and understand our role in the performance, the better we can fulfill that role. So great discussion. Thank you. And that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.